as Neil just said, he's invited us here today to talk about why this project is important from a South Georgia perspective. But really, I hope over the course of this workshop that you'll get an appreciation for just how important this work is yourselves. So I'm going to go a little bit off brief and actually give you a bit of a story, try to describe some of the challenges South Georgia faces so that when you think about this workshop and the stuff you learn, you can think what applications there might be for South Georgia in the future. Everyone here knows where South Georgia is, I hope. It'd be really embarrassing if you didn't at this point. But probably most of you haven't been there, and that's for a very good reason, because it's very difficult to get to. It's 750 miles southeast of the Falklands. It's south of the Antarctic convergence, and there's no way to fly there. So if you're going to get there, you've got to spend a few days on a boat before you get the first sight of it. If ever you get the opportunity, it's well worth it. So it's worth the visit. But from a management perspective, this poses some really unique problems or challenges. Apart from the two government officers which have a year-round presence on the ground, they take it in rotation. The rest of the government works from here in Stanley and a couple remotely from the UK. So to manage a place that we're not there, and even if we was there, it's a big place and it's quite remote, is very difficult. If you haven't been there, you might not really comprehend the size and scale of it. So if you overlap the Falklands over South Georgia, you can see that South Georgia is about the size of the Falklands from corner to corner. So it's a significant lump of land and a long way from anywhere. I suppose the other key thing to think about South Georgia is that it's mountainous, covered in glaciers and fjords. So it's a very different landscape to the Falklands. It's a bit like the Falklands on steroids, really. Everything is just a little bit more over the top. So as a result of that, we've got a very long coastline for a relatively small island. But none of the habitats or the coastline itself in South Georgia is static. Everything's changing. So you can see here we've got a big glacier pouring ice out into the ocean, and that has been retreating over the last decades. And as it does that, it's changing the shape of the coastline. So if we overlay a map which shows the previous extent of the glacier, you can see, like in the 1970s, where this red line is, that was the first records, and then the 90s are here, so not much change, but then we're right up to here at the moment, or a little bit beyond. So you can see over recent years there's been a massive change, and that's exposed whole new new coastline, new headlands, new valleys, new areas which are completely sterile, or were when they were exposed, and those areas are really prone to non-native species getting in there first and being the first thing to establish. So these areas are really delicate, and we need to keep a close eye on them. So this picture isn't of South Georgia, but it's the age-old picture of men with sticks pillaging the planet. You know, we're all familiar with this sort of image, and on South Georgia, sealing took place, and removed a vast majority of the fur seals were taken. Same whaling later, but luckily this has changed too. So in recent times, the fur seals, more notably, have made a massive recovery in their population, and now you can see the whaling stations are derelict, and they're actually being sort of taken over, as it were, by fur seals and elephant seals and things like that. So it's quite a nice story of recovery. But with the recovery of the fur seals, in some places they've encroached into the tussock fringes, and they've redefined the extents of different habitats. So there used to be reindeer on South Georgia, and before eradication there was these exclusion areas set up to see what South Georgia might look like if it wasn't being grazed by reindeer. So you can see the area inside the fence, the tussock, is really completely different to sort of the land around it. So you could see that during the time that reindeer were there was a massive change on the habitat through not only grazing but erosion, trampling, and reindeer had this habit of sort of getting their antlers and sort of scuffing up the tussock. So in the absence of reindeer, we hope that there will be recovery and that these habitats will be more diverse, they'll be more robust. But it's very hard to measure those sorts of changes on a big scale. So there has been some work done, and Sally is the expert in the room on a lot of this, but there has been some work to see what might have changed, but really it's very difficult to see at a glance. So coastal habitat mapping might be a really good application. So the removal of rodents, so last year the South Georgia was declared free of rodents, and that will have had a massive effect on the island's ecology. In the presence of rodents, things like pipits, the little endemic songbird there on the side, they couldn't thrive, so they were virtually wiped out or pushed to the margins where rodents weren't present. But now, without rodents being on South Georgia, the pipits are making a comeback. So again, there's some anecdotal recovery, but it's very difficult to measure and to really assess. And human activities are another thing that have changed massively. So if you think back to the men with sticks, there were very few of them, but they had a really big impact. Now we get a lot of visitors, but their impact is minor or transitory, and they come to see this abundant, amazing wildlife and scenery. It's a cliche, but they come to take pictures and to leave only footprints. However, like the Falklands, we've seen a growth in tourism. So up to the blue bar here is the trend of growth, but there are a number of expedition cruise ships being built at the moment, which on the basis of that, there's an expectation that growth will increase beyond its current state. So the theory could be that within the next 5 years, we see a tripling of the number of visitors that get there. And we could be faced with a situation more like this, where they're still only taking photos and leaving footprints, but what sort of experience is this? What sort of impact might that level of visitation have on South Georgia? Don't know, but we need to understand their impact so that we can manage for it. So the Coastal Habitat Mapping Project is a really important way for us to begin to understand what threats, what challenges South Georgia is under, and then we can develop policies that are appropriate and relevant and can hopefully mitigate for that, so that we can allow increased visitation, but without creating this scenario where people are ruining what they come to see. So the logistic constraints of monitoring in these areas are very clear. But how can we begin to understand what change looks like on a remote and inaccessible coast? And how can we manage the factors which threaten these habitats? So I think coastal mapping, hopefully you're beginning to, or will by the end of this workshop, see that there's lots of things that at the moment we don't use coastal habitat mapping for, but it could be very, very useful. And what's really useful, if you think back to the map of the glacial retreat, is not just the snapshot that this sort of work gives us of today, but when you compare data collected over a time frame, you get to see those temporal changes, and then you can really appreciate what might be changing. Personally, I'm only beginning to realise some of the applications of this technology and methodology. But I'm here to learn and take full advantage of having the experts in the room. But I'm also looking to learn from all of you. I think you no doubt will have flashes of inspiration throughout this workshop. Please share them. The injection of expertise and knowledge from projects such as this is really valuable to the Falklands and to South Georgia. But ultimately it falls to those of us in the room that actually apply this knowledge and use these tools to bring about some change, some benefit that's long-term and is not just transitory. So with that in mind, I really encourage you to engage with this workshop, think creatively, ask questions, and share your ideas no matter how wacky they might be. And finally, I'd like to thank Neil, Brand and Gua for putting on this workshop and for delivering a project which is hugely useful and will no doubt have some real value going forward. So, thank you.